Brenda thought she ran the neighborhood. As the ruthless HOA president, she pushed around families, silenced complaints, and demanded absolute control. But when she targeted Emily, an innocent new mother, and tried to seize her newborn, she didn't realize Emily's husband, Jake, was a highly trained Navy SEAL. What started as petty rule enforcement turned into a full-scale takedown of corruption, lies, and intimidation. This isn't just a story about an HOA gone rogue, it's about what happens when you mess with the wrong family. Watch the full documentary now to see how Jake exposed the truth, dismantled the scheme, and turned Brenda's empire of fear into her ultimate downfall. Ask ChatGPT. We had just moved into what we thought would be our forever home. After years of traveling from one military base to another, my wife and I were ready for peace, for stability, and for the kind of place where our newborn daughter could grow up safely. The neighborhood we chose looked perfect: neatly trimmed hedges, quiet streets, smiling neighbors walking their dogs. The homes were all well kept, and the community gave off a calm, orderly feel that we both craved after the chaos of deployments and relocations. At first, it felt like a dream. I spent mornings taking slow walks with my wife and the baby, adjusting to civilian life again. Neighbors waved, the park down the street was always clean, and the local school district had glowing reviews. But slowly, the mood shifted. It began with notes, little slips of paper tucked under our door or taped to the mailbox. The first one was about our lawn, suggesting it was half an inch too long. The next was about our trash bins, which were apparently placed 3 inches outside the designated zone. We were confused, maybe even amused at first. It didn't seem serious, just an overzealous neighbor or someone with too much time. But the notes kept coming. We learned quickly who was behind them. Her name was Brenda, and she introduced herself as the HOA president with a tone that made it sound like she'd been elected to Congress. She wasn't friendly. She was sharp, direct, and had an odd habit of looking past you, as if sizing up your home for violations even while saying hello. Brenda had a presence. She wasn't just a stickler for rules, she lived for them. We'd see her walking the streets twice a day, clipboard in hand, jotting things down like she was running inspections for a military base. She flagged everything from bird feeders to doormats. Nothing escaped her judgment, and she seemed particularly focused on our home. We didn't understand why. Maybe it was the fact that we were new. Maybe it was the stroller she thought looked unsightly on our front porch. But it quickly became clear we were under her microscope. She began emailing us directly, citing specific HOA rules we had supposedly violated. One morning, we got a formal warning because our baby had cried too loudly and for too long the night before. Another time, she accused us of running an unapproved daycare because my sister came by with her 2 children for an afternoon visit. Every week brought a new complaint, each more absurd than the last. We tried reasoning, ignoring, even complying with her endless demands, hoping she'd turn her attention elsewhere. But instead of fading, her behavior grew more intense. It started to feel less like rule enforcement and more like a personal vendetta. She wasn't just managing a neighborhood, she was trying to control it. And while we didn't know it yet, Brenda was just getting started. What had begun as a series of harmless notes was about to spiral into something far more dangerous. It was a warm Saturday morning when things took a darker turn. I had stepped out for a quick jog around the neighborhood trail, just a few minutes away from the house. My wife stayed back, rocking our daughter gently on the front porch, enjoying the sun and the quiet that usually came with weekends. It should have been a peaceful moment, but that calm was shattered when Brenda marched up the sidewalk with a look of pure determination on her face. What happened next, my wife recounted to me in a trembling voice when I returned, still sweaty from the run. Brenda didn't greet her or ask to speak. She pointed at our daughter and accused my wife of being unfit, claiming she had heard the baby crying day and night, and was convinced something wasn't right. She said the child looked pale, tired, and stressed, which was absurd. Our daughter was perfectly healthy, and like any newborn, she cried from time to time. But Brenda didn't care about facts. She cared about control. That night, we found something even more disturbing in our mailbox. A typed letter on official-looking HOA letterhead, signed by Brenda and approved by the board. It claimed that due to ongoing disruptions caused by improper childcare, our family had been flagged for observation. The letter included a chilling line. If this pattern of negligence continues, the HOA reserves the right to escalate the matter to relevant family welfare agencies. The words didn't just feel threatening, they felt insane. The HOA is meant to handle lawn maintenance rules, not parental fitness. And yet, here was a letter implying that our daughter could be taken from us. We sat at the kitchen table, stunned, reading the letter over and over, trying to make sense of it. My wife started crying. I had seen fear in combat zones, but this was different. This was fear in our own home, for our own child, and it was coming not from criminals or strangers, but from a neighbor who had decided she had authority over our family. I knew I had to act, but I also knew that reacting emotionally would only give Brenda more ammunition. The next day, we contacted a lawyer. He looked over the letter and shook his head. "This isn't legal," he said. "This isn't even close." He explained that no HOA has the authority to monitor parenting, let alone threaten child removal. But Brenda had dressed the letter in just enough formal language to make it seem credible to someone unfamiliar with the law. She wasn't just trying to scare us, she was laying a paper trail, building a case based on lies and fabrications. Suddenly, everything felt dangerous. Every knock on the door. Every car that slowed down in front of the house. We began to wonder if Brenda had actually reported us to child services, and if so, what might come next. What we once thought was an irritating neighbor had revealed herself to be something else entirely, a threat to our family. And we had to figure out what to do before she pushed things even further. We knew we couldn't afford to stay passive anymore. What started as strange notes and overreaching complaints had evolved into something more sinister. Brenda had crossed a line, and we needed to understand exactly what kind of person we were dealing with. So we started looking into her background, her history in the neighborhood, and her role on the HOA board. What we found was more than just unsettling. It revealed a calculated pattern that had affected far more people than we realized. First, we spoke with a few neighbors we had seen around but never really gotten to know. When we carefully brought up Brenda's name, something changed in their eyes. A quiet hesitation, followed by caution. Most didn't want to talk at all. But one older couple, who had lived on the street for more than 20 years, finally opened up. They said Brenda had taken over the HOA about 5 years earlier, and ever since then, the neighborhood had changed. At first, her strict rules and aggressive citations were seen as annoying but harmless. But then families with children began leaving. A young mother down the block had sold her house just 6 months after moving in, citing unrelenting complaints and stress. Another couple who'd put up a small inflatable pool for their kids in the backyard had received daily violations until they packed up and left. It wasn't a coincidence. Brenda didn't just dislike children, she targeted families, especially new ones. As we dug deeper, the pieces started to fit together. A pattern emerged, one that suggested something much bigger than simple neighborhood harassment. Every time a family left under pressure, their homes sold quickly, and often below market value. And always through the same real estate agent. The agent, we discovered, had personal ties to Brenda. We found online records showing multiple home sales linked to the same agency, and every one of them traced back to people who had been harassed by the HOA. It was a quiet, effective scheme, make life unbearable for new families, especially those unfamiliar with the HOA's limits, force them out through intimidation, then flip the houses for a quick profit. Brenda wasn't just enforcing rules, she was manipulating them for personal gain. And the worst part was, no one had ever stood up to her. Most victims just wanted peace. They moved out to escape the stress, not to fight legal battles. Brenda counted on that. But in our case, she had miscalculated. She thought we were just another young couple with a baby and no backbone. She had no idea about my background, my training, or the fact that I had spent years dealing with pressure, threats, and people far more dangerous than a power-hungry HOA president. Now we had evidence. We had a motive. And we had a reason to fight, not just for our own family, but for every neighbor she had pushed out. This wasn't just about reclaiming peace anymore. It was about exposing the truth, piece by piece, until Brenda's entire web of control collapsed. We knew that simply confronting Brenda head-on wouldn't work. She thrived on conflict, using it as fuel to twist the narrative in her favor. Every escalation gave her more reason to involve others, to fabricate more rules, to push harder. So instead of reacting emotionally, we turned to strategy, something I had learned to rely on during years of operations in hostile environments. This wasn't combat, but it required the same kind of discipline and patience. The first thing we did was install security cameras around our home, discreet ones with high resolution and night vision. We wanted clear records of any encounters, any strange activity, and any further attempts by Brenda to approach the house or accuse us of something we didn't do. Then we started documenting everything, every note, every letter, every email she had sent since we moved in. We organized them by date, scanned copies, and backed them up in multiple locations. I reached out to a trusted contact, a former teammate from my last tour who now worked as a licensed private investigator. I shared what we had discovered so far, the harassment, the fraudulent real estate deals, the intimidation tactics, and asked if he could verify some of the information. Within days, he found links between Brenda and the real estate agency that were stronger than we expected. They weren't just professional acquaintances. They were family. The agent she kept funneling houses to was her sister-in-law, operating under a different last name. That connection made her actions more than just unethical. They bordered on criminal conspiracy. Meanwhile, we filed a complaint with the State Housing Authority. We submitted all of our evidence, videos of Brenda approaching our property, scans of her letters, and testimonies from former neighbors willing to speak anonymously. That complaint triggered an internal review of the HOA's conduct. Most boards operate under strict guidelines, with checks and balances to prevent abuse. But Brenda had filled the board with people too timid to challenge her or too detached to care. Now, they were being investigated too. Even as all of this was unfolding, Brenda continued her campaign. She left yet another letter in our mailbox, this one more disturbing than all the others. It accused my wife of continued failure to uphold community standards of care, and claimed that if we didn't attend an emergency review meeting, the HOA would take temporary possession of our child for her own well-being. There were no signatures from other board members, no legal backing, just Brenda's signature and her fake authority. That was the final straw. She wasn't just pushing boundaries anymore, she was trying to create her own laws. But now, the net was closing in around her. The documents we had collected, the witnesses who were coming forward, the financial records linking her to real estate profits, it was all coming together. What Brenda didn't know was that we had already handed everything over to the authorities. And very soon, it wouldn't be our parenting under review. It would be her entire operation. The day everything unraveled for Brenda started just like any other. She made her usual rounds through the neighborhood with that same smug expression, clipboard in hand, acting like a self-appointed sheriff in a town no one asked her to protect. But while she patrolled the sidewalks looking for flower pots out of place and trash bins an inch too far from the curb, something much bigger was quietly in motion behind the scenes. The evidence we had gathered had already been submitted to law enforcement, the State Housing Authority, and a local investigative journalist who'd been looking into HOA abuse for months. The moment Brenda left that final letter threatening to take possession of our newborn, things shifted from civil harassment to criminal behavior. The authorities took immediate interest. What followed was a swift, coordinated response that even Brenda couldn't predict. That morning, multiple unmarked vehicles rolled into the neighborhood. Officers from the State Fraud Investigation Unit, backed by local law enforcement, approached Brenda's house while other agents served subpoenas at the office of her sister-in-law's real estate agency. It didn't take long. She was led out in handcuffs by noon, surrounded by stunned neighbors, some watching in silence, others quietly nodding with relief. Charges included harassment, intimidation, abuse of position, and conspiracy to commit real estate fraud. The letter threatening to take our child was enough to raise red flags about her mental stability, and her computer was seized for evidence of forged HOA documents and misappropriated funds. The fallout spread quickly. Other board members resigned within days, many claiming they had no idea how deep Brenda's manipulation ran. Some even cooperated with investigators, providing internal emails and meeting notes that showed how Brenda had consolidated power by intimidating anyone who opposed her. It turned out the HOA hadn't functioned properly in years. Financial reports were falsified, votes were rigged, and homeowners who resisted were systematically pressured into leaving. In the weeks that followed, the HOA was officially dissolved pending restructuring. A temporary oversight committee was appointed by the Housing Authority to manage community affairs until a new election could be held. More importantly, protections were put in place to ensure no future president could ever hold unchecked authority again. As for our family, the relief was immediate. The anxiety that had clung to our home like a dark cloud finally lifted. We could sit on our porch without watching over our shoulders. My wife could walk with our baby without being accused of neglect. The house, once filled with stress and fear, felt like home again. Brenda thought she could bully and threaten us like she had so many others. She didn't know who she was dealing with. I didn't need to use my fists or raise my voice. I simply used the skills I had honed during years of service: observation, planning, precision, and discipline. In the end, she wasn't just brought down by justice. She was brought down by the truth. And in this neighborhood, that was the one thing she never thought would catch up to her.